Have you ever felt heavy on the inside, cannot explain why you're feeling overwhelmed, disconnected, just a weight on the inside of you? And sometimes you can just have feelings of heaviness and you cannot quite put your finger on what's really going on the inside. Now, if you've ever felt like this, or maybe you're feeling like this conversation is for you. Hi, welcome to the Motivate to Elevate podcast. I am your host, Coach Corey, and today we will be speaking about a little discussed topic, which is grief. This is one area many people are going through and don't even know it. And so today I want us to unpack what is grief? How does it manifest? What do I need to know? And how can I begin to fix those areas of my life that I have been grieving and I'm not even aware of? So let's dive in. While the death of a loved one does lead us to grief, the definition of grief is actually wider than that. Grief is an emotional response to lost relationships. You could lose a friend, a loved one, and even if that person is alive, you can still grieve the loss of that relationship. Number two, lost identity. You can grieve a version of yourself that used to be. I've seen people grieve different stages of life. Maybe you are single, now you're married, and maybe you're going through challenges in your marriage, and now you're grieving that previous version of yourself that seems to be no more. Or maybe you entered motherhood or parenting, or you're a caregiver for a sick person and you're missing your old life. That is very, very possible. The other thing is, that can constitute grief is lost or missed expectations. This happens a lot in careers, in moves, maybe from one country to another. You are expecting life to be a particular way and it's not happening that way. You remember the children of Israel when they left Egypt and they were going to the promised land, and there was that wilderness period. When we are in a wilderness period, we can grieve even a difficult past, so that you can find yourself remembering the good parts of that difficult past and almost like forgetting the pain. And so when you're grieving that, you don't even have a full picture because your mind is telling you that life was better than the life you're in. And sometimes we just need to be patient through that wilderness phase, especially if there is hope of a bright future ahead. So I hope this is making sense, that we can understand that grief is not limited to dying of another person, but maybe dying of a season, getting out of a particular season of life or relationship or career or health, whatever it may be, or even finances. You could have lost a job and you're grieving that job, that you're grieving the loss of that job. Okay, so clearly we can see you don't need a typical funeral to be going through grief. The truth is, if it mattered to you, when that thing goes away, you will grieve. And sometimes, like I said, we will grieve from one season to the next. I want to talk about disenfranchised grief. I know that's a big word, but here's the thing. There is a type of grief that society doesn't seem to recognize, but you're feeling it. It's real to you. It could be especially things like the loss of a friend. People are like, this happens every day. Get over it. Or I've seen it happen where a woman goes through a miscarriage and you'll find another woman telling her, you know what, it's not that big a deal. You'll get pregnant again. When somebody is comparing their pain with yours, so that now you're going through a grieving period, but you're not being understood. You're being disenfranchised in your season. And so people are expecting you to kind of act like you're not hurting, act like you're fine. And this happens a lot when you carry responsibilities, say like a family, or you can be staying in a very toxic relationship because maybe you're responsible for others. And when you try to air your situation, you're trying to get some help or to be heard, it's downplayed. That's what we call disenfranchised grief. And so I want us to really be aware that there's so many people who are going through disenfranchised grief because maybe the society that you're in does not recognize that what you're going through as grief. And that's why you see some people really going downhill. You can have someone who was having a really amazing high-flying job. I mean, they could fly wherever they wanted. They could afford the good restaurants. I mean, they could do the finer things in life. Then they lose that job and they just can't seem to pick themselves up. Especially when you get into, those ages where there is age discrimination in the workplace, where the younger generation is being preferred. And even they're saying, you're old, you don't need to be looking for a job, you should be retired by now. You are so invalidated in that place. Okay? And so I want us to really, really be sensitive. The reason I'm sharing this is I don't want us to just learn, but I want us to be sensitive to one another, because it is in that place that we begin to see how we can help each other to get out of those situations. Another kind of disenfranchised grief is when you have maybe you're grieving a version of your parents that used to be. Especially, I see this very common with people who have aging. And so as our parents age, they are not able to do some of the things that they used to do. Maybe they have health challenges. And I see people really going through a mourning period as they deal with elderly parents, and they can't get over how deteriorated maybe that parent is. And also not just a parent, it could be also you have a sick person in hospital, it could be a friend, it could be a relative, a sibling, a spouse. So all those things, especially when society expects you to continue with life because that person is not dead yet or have not left this earth yet, you can feel very misunderstood, and you could be going through a very difficult season as you try to accept that reality. One of the things that really happens in those types of situations is people don't check in on you. People don't ask the caregivers, how are you doing? Or when you have that kind of a loss, in the disenfranchised grief category, a lot of people will not check on you. So what do? You suppress it because nobody wants to hear it. You got laid off. You suppress it. You have a kid going through drugs, alcohol. You suppress it. You're hurting. You don't know what to do. You're grieving the hopes and dreams that you had even for yourself. You suppress it, and you just try to put one foot in front of the other because society has not taught us how to deal with these things. And so one of the things that will happen is you start shrinking, you start minimizing yourself, you start not giving your opinion in areas that even where you're needed. Because in your subconscious mind, guess what is going on? You've already communicated to yourself because society is telling you something, and you have now had to internalize it. And so you start thinking you don't matter. So I'm telling us these things because those are some of the things that lead us to mental health crisis. And we many times don't understand. For many of us, we come from a place of grief to trauma, and we have a full meltdown, a full mental health crisis, or we go off on the deep end and we start manifesting in ways that are less than ideal. Now, the other thing I want us to know is, even as we're defining grief, it will take a toll on you. It will take a toll on your body. And when it's taking a toll on your body, it's not pretty. I mean, I have seen situations where you'll find someone is throwing up, they can't eat, they have no appetite, they can't stand certain smells. And no, they're not pregnant. It's just because their nervous system is responding. And I'll probably have another episode where I talk more about how we really manifest grief. For today, I just wanted to begin to just have a quick definition of what grief really looks like, or the definition of grief, so that I'm laying this foundation so that next time when I go into a deep dive, it makes more sense. The thing to note about grief is that it doesn't have a timeline, especially when it's unprocessed. It has no timeline. Now, when we have a death of a loved one, there's 1 minute you can be feeling very okay, and you think you're healed. Then the next minute you break. Maybe you remember a song, or you hear a song, or a certain smell, or a certain restaurant you used to go to, or a certain conversation comes up. Those are called triggers, and it triggers your emotions, and that grief just comes flooding back. Now, this is just, again, a little tip. I'm going to talk about it in a later episode. As we're defining this, I just want us to keep some of these things in mind, that grief is non-linear. You don't really move on, because you are never going to be that person who was before the grief, but you learn how to live in a healthy way, having processed that grief. And so when it comes to healing, it's a matter of integration, not forgetting. Healing does not mean you've forgotten, especially when we're talking about a difficult experience where there was a heavy loss. It normally leads us, when we heal, into integrate it, and it makes it change our value system. Again, I'll talk about that later. As we define grief, let's also understand not two people grieve the same way. I'm sure you've seen 2 people in a family lose a parent, a sibling, a loved one, and they operate very differently. They process their grief very differently. Can have one person go back to work immediately and just immerse themselves, and they become busy. Then you can have the other person crying and breaking and just can't seem to get a handle on themselves. Grieving comes in different languages. So there's different ways to grieve. And so we cannot say that you can only grieve in one way. And I'm just giving an example. There are many different ways that people grieve. My point is, grief is very personal, and we need to begin also to understand the different ways that people grieve so that we don't misunderstand them. And also, if you're going through that grief, allow yourself space to be able to grieve in a healthy way. Now, some of the manifestations of grief are emotional grief. Now, emotional grief is the crying and the sadness I talked about. And then there's cognitive grief, which is now where you go through a time where you actually don't remember stuff. You forget, you have brain fog. Then we have physical grief, where now the nervous system is the one that's really processing it. You have fatigue, you have headaches, health issues, you can't sleep, you're restless. Or maybe you enter into a place where, like, you're depressed. You don't want to see people. You're going into a dark place, which is now behavior. I can never say behavioral. This is where there's isolation, there's overworking, there's avoidance. You don't want to talk about it. You don't want to think about it. You block stuff, and people are now walking around you like eggshells, because they don't know when you'll go crazy. You may have an explosion moment. So those are things to just begin to understand. As I wrap up today's conversation, I just want us to understand one thing. Grief is not weakness. In fact, it's love. Love for the thing that you're grieving. Love for maybe that situation that got you to where you are. Now, it's not always a good thing, because sometimes we may be grieving things that were not even good for us to begin with. But it's important to understand that when we are grieving, we are coming from a place of, we believed that that thing was a good thing. Now, as we move on with this conversation, we need to begin to unpack more on how grief drives our daily life, how we interact with people, how sometimes we will push people away, people who want to help us. I am sure you have seen where you have been pushed away or where you're pushing people away. Sometimes we make really, really bad financial decisions. Actually, we just make bad decisions, and finances can be part of that decision. Poor health decision, poor eating decisions. We're going to talk about how it's manifesting in our daily lives so that we can create an awareness and get the help that we need. If this episode has been helpful to you, please go ahead and subscribe, like, and share, and join me next time as we go deeper into this topic, because it is when we understand what we're dealing with, then we understand how we can begin to address it and to get out of that situation. Until next time, God bless you.